Hi, everybody. It's Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better For Worse.
And Lisa Pataska with Canine Defined.
Hello. Hopefully, you're having a great evening. I know tonight is Super Bowl, Super Bowl night. So we'll see about who comes and tries to partially listen to what we have to talk about today. Today, we're talking about training. What's the best age to train your dog? Right. A lot of people, we get that question all the time. I don't know about you guys about, it's my dog's it's too old and it's like a year old or something like that. So I thought it'd be a nice topic to talk about why, what age is the best age, and how the dogs are able to learn as they get older. So just like we are, it's just we just learn differently, I guess. So let us know you're out there, and so we're gonna kind of chat about, obviously, just like humans, when you're a child, it's easier to you learn more things, and your ability to be more to understand things are just a little easier when you're a young versus when you're a little older. It doesn't mean that you're not learning as you get older. It's just it's a little different. It may take a little longer. So yes, it's true that when you're younger, you're able to take in more information and process it and learn it. But that doesn't mean that you are not able, that you can't learn more as you get older. So, and it's true for dogs as well, right? When you're a puppy, that's why you want to make sure they have the best experiences, and that's when they're learning the most. So, um, so it's an important time during that. Um, and also, we wanted to kind of talk about when the most difficult time is to train your dog, or one of the more challenging times um, to train our beloved canine companions. And also, and with relation to dog sports, how as dogs mature and as they get older, how their learning changes as well. So those are all things we wanted to chat about. So let me, Lisa and Joanne, do you get that question a lot? Oh my, is my dog too old to learn to go to come to class or whatever?
I don't get it very often unless it's like a 8, 9, 10-year-old, right? Rescue dogs usually is when, well, I don't know if they can learn anything, they're set in their ways type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
How
I
about
hear
you,
that.
Lisa?
Yeah, I do. I hear that too, but it's not as frequent because usually we're seeing dogs when they're in their prime challenging stage. So, you know,
Yeah.
but I also think the other thing to mention too is like sometimes people think dogs are too young to start training.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, but I
Yes.
say
Yeah,
start
that's
them as
true.
early as you can.
Right. Well, especially since their learning it's the most, they're learning so much more when they're really young puppies. So a lot of people, and I know some vets still tell people to keep their dogs home until they're 6 months old, which unfortunately is the most important window to to start training them, because that's when they're learning the most. So
Yeah.
you miss that little bit of window when you do that. I
Hmm.
know there back in the day, I think that was more common to prevent parvo and all that. But nowadays, it's not as big of a problem, right? At least I
Actually,
it has.
like in our area, it's a little interesting. There's kind of a mixed bag of that, and I'm not certain why, but it's it is something that I've heard a lot. Like, don't start them until they've completed their shots, their
Mm-hmm.
series, and stuff like that because of whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's a little late, but in my opinion, but I get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and you definitely have to be careful. Um, you definitely have to be careful with that. You just can't just take your puppies everywhere. But
Hmm.
I think if they have their first couple of puppy shots and all that, I think that um, should be okay. You know what I mean? They should be able to handle that. But again, a lot of vets are still, um, a little bit more cautious about that. So, I was
Sure,
just
sure.
yeah. So, Anyway, so one of the studies that they did is um, how aging affects the cognitive ability of dogs as they age, and while that's going to decline, their ability to cognitively um, to their cognition declines. It's still they still can learn. It still just might take them a little longer, just like us. Those of us that are a little older, um, could learn things, but sometimes you might have to hear it a few different ways or kind of look at it a couple different ways to be able to process it. Same with a more mature dog, right?
Mhm.
And for the puppies, I think they recommend, let's see, it's important to create structure, and I know we talk about it all the time, relationship building and structure. Um, when they're really young, like 8 to 16 weeks, right? Getting them out in
Mhm.
the new environments and all that stuff, because that's when they're going to really be able to do it well. But again, that still means that they have to have a good experience, or they have to be able to handle that. So it's getting them out, depending on what you're going to do. Like my dogs are going to do competition, so I want them to be comfortable being outside or being in the car, going to different places. It's super, it's important. So
Yeah, no, they well, today it was interesting. So I was saying, I told you guys earlier before we came on. So I have a little guy. He's an Irish Golden Doodle. He's 3 months old ish, maybe 3 months and a week ish, and super pliable. Nothing kind of bothers him. Things can fall on his head, and he's like, "Oh well." He doesn't get startled easy. And today, so he's 3 months ish old. And today we went to a new location to work on stuff. Can you walk with me? Can you tolerate the environment? Can you, when you're concerned, can you look to me? Stuff like that. And then we did some basic stuff really well. Okay. Then I have my Papillon, Riff, who is a little over 7 months. And he's like, I can't. This is crazy. So he's a little more sensitive. And I was like, can you have a cookie? And he's like, he spit out the cookie. And I was like, oh, it's a little too much, huh? So we stood there for a bit. He recovered slightly, but it wasn't enough where I was like, we're good. But I think there is a sweet spot when you introduce things to dogs, right? And I think that like he clearly is in a sensitive stage. And I think, and I've seen this interestingly enough, I've seen it often, and I'm sure you guys have too, where people try to train through stuff and we almost make it more of a thing than anything. And then the dogs are like, this sucks. I don't like it. And I'm not going to do it, or I don't want to, or it makes it more of an issue for the dog.
right.
And so when I saw that happen, I'm like, we're done. You can go, hang out in the car for a little bit and work on let's riding in the car. So I didn't push it because I don't want to make it a big issue. But I think too, preemptively, people will check things out like, Google and how to handle certain behaviors or whatever, and YouTube and stuff like that. And then they actually listen to various information that's out there. But remember that information is information. It's only valid according to the individual and the person receiving it, right? And how they receive it. So I think a lot of times it can be a little misleading in terms of some of the training. So I don't know if you guys have experienced that, getting called in for, like today I was called in for a dog he goes in the crate, and then the second you go to close the door, he's lunging at the crate. And so I'm like,
Oh.
he's 9 months old. Yeah. But he'll go in the crate without a problem, anything. So then I try to counter condition it and say, okay, well, what if you go in the crate and I put cookies in the back? He was to the point, he was so highly charged that he could not take the cookies at all. And it was cheese and like meats. And I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, but they tried to do a lot of stuff preemptively to prevent anything from being an issue. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? It's kind of interesting that way. I don't know if you guys have seen some of that.
Well, and sometimes if they're when they're going through a sensitivity period, it's we always recommend taking a break and not doing that for a little while. And I mean, a little while means like a week, because those fear periods or those sensitivity periods come and go as quickly. One day it's a problem, the next day it's not a problem at all. So it's one of those things you have to just kind of keep continually checking and see if it continues to be a problem, right? Because usually it doesn't last long. So people stop doing things for long periods. It's like, no, that's not necessary. Don't need that big of a break, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things, Lisa, you talked about in the beginning with Riff, right? And I see this more and more and more, which is end on a positive note. We just got to get through this. Cookies will fix it, right? And it's sort of like, it's weird, right? Because you're like, that thing's scary, but here's a cookie. You're like, but that thing's really scary. Well, no, it's not scary. I promise. Just come over here and have a cookie. And you're like, I think it's scary, and you're having this conversation with the dog, and the dog's like, I don't cookies are not appropriate right now. I mean, I might eat them, but just because they're eating them and tolerating that situation doesn't mean you're doing a good thing for the dog, right? In terms of learning environments and learning new things, I want my dog to, if they're not willing to check it out, I want them to be willing observers, right? And so to me, that means, right, my dog might be like, I don't want to be in the mix. I don't want to be close to it, but I am going to sit over here and I'm going to figure all that stuff out. I'm going to see what that is. And maybe it's just a quiet little observation in the corner, but as soon as my dog's in a war zone with, head on a swivel, what's that? What's this? What's that? It's like, that's too much. Yes, the cookie eating will tell you where they're at, right? Can I eat a cookie or not? But just, I always have to caution people, don't use the cookies and don't use behaviors and touch and sit and come here and this and that. And right. It doesn't, they still know the thing is there, right? Just because they're doing it doesn't make the thing better.
Right.
Right. And so the goals for your puppies, or those of you with young dogs, the first thing would be exposure to the environment, to different environments. And that's really is going to matter. And it's going to depend on what kind of life you're going to have with your dog. Does that make sense? So if you're going to, again, like in my case, I'm going to travel with my dogs a lot. So being in the car really matters a lot. Being comfortable in the car really matters a lot. And I think it's true for all dogs, but some dogs, like, you want them to be okay with being crated around other dogs. Well, for me, that's an important skill because my dogs are going to be doing that. For other people, that might not be such an important thing. So you want to make sure whatever you're exposing your puppies to or your dogs to is something that's going to be important to you, not because somebody told you to do it, right? So you want to make sure that it's going to be fit in your lifestyle, and it's going to matter to your home and your lifestyle, right? Because a lot of people, oh, you want a really good stay. Yeah, you do, but it depends on what, how you're going to use it and what you're going to use it. So everything, when you go, like when we tell people, when they come to our puppy and basic classes, it really depends, like, what's your lifestyle? What are you going to use more? And that's what you should work on more, right? And so when your puppy is young, like, what's going to be important for his life long term is what you probably need to expose him to as early as possible. And I know for those of us who rescue, that's not always a possibility because, we might get them a little older. And now, can they still learn it? Yes. Will it be a little bit more challenging? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you have a dog that will pick stuff up much quicker, but know that they can still learn. You just have to maybe have more patience because they might have other things to deal with too. Those, whether it's a breeding dog or a dog from a breeder or a rescue, and then you might have missed that window of putting all that good information in because temperament matters too, right?
Yeah, I think and that's interesting, right? I mean, the like, I had taken a little break, like I hadn't taken. I mean, I think what was it? The last time I was up by you, Nancy, is when the last time I took him in a crate in a new place, or in the car and so forth. And then I was like, oh, today I have a little bit of time. Let's go somewhere else and do something different. And so it was just interesting, the Like some people force it, like Joanne was saying, like go say hi and, go touch and this and that. And I mean, I don't teach any of that stuff, but it was a big fat clue to me when my dog sat there and was like, yeah, no. And he kind of sat there and looked around, and I tried to like guide him a little bit with the leash. He's like, nope. And I'm like, okay, gotcha. And that was it. Like that was enough. I gave him a minute to see if he would come back to it. And I think a lot of people, like you said, they teach alternate behaviors, like go touch it, go touch the big scary spider. And I think you have to be careful with how you utilize that. I think of some of the things where we can, with the good intention of treats and so forth, that makes it, oh, I'm training them, trying to get through this. We need to work on it, stuff like that. And sometimes that becomes, kind of backfires on us. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I would rather take a young dog and train a puppy. To me, that's easiest because there's quicker information. The neural pathways are really open and stuff like that. So they're developing. It's so much easier to get that information in. The hardest part for me is teenagers. And I think that's the majority of people. The teenagers are harder because they're at that stage where they're testing everything. They're, their inhibitory neurons are more excitatory right now then. So they're more willing to take a lot more risk and just craziness. So that's more of where I get more gray hairs in my head because of that.
Yep. The other thing you definitely want to work on when your puppy's young is body handling and husbandry work when they go to the vet and stuff like that, because that's gonna last them a lifetime. Because here's the thing: whatever they learn at a really young age, it's gonna stay with them a lot longer than the stuff you put in later, right? They're gonna go back to some of those what they first were exposed to, or the first things they learned. So you want to be sure that what you're teaching them when they're puppies is really what you want them to learn, right?
And it's fast. Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead. I think. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, and I'll talk. You go ahead.
Yeah, and then going to the vet a lot and all that. Because I did that with all of my dogs. Like I'd go to the vet and weigh them, and then go on my way to work. And that has been a really good thing because none of my dogs really worry about going to the vet. They think it's a great thing. And all I did is on my way to work, I'd stop at the vet, weigh them, or go in and visit, and then leave. Mm-hmm. So, and I did that at a really young age, and that seemed to be something they all like. Oh, okay. The vet is so familiar because I did it when they were so young. So those are the kind of things that they'll find a lot of comfort in some of that stuff when they were. That's why if you have a breeder that does a lot of enrichment, it really makes a huge difference when they go to their homes, right?
Mm-hmm. When you're talking about like the first learn stuff, things that they first learn, they go back to. It's like us, especially if it's a really positive association. Right. So there, if you think about going back to this case where there was this beagle, or not a beagle, it was a spaniel who was doing the guarding at the door and stuff like that. That dog takes really good notes, right? Because they thought they didn't want it to be an issue, so they would train stuff, but they never had a problem if he would go in the crate and walked by it or anything like that. It's only closing the door, so it's very situational. And I think, like when we're like, well, they don't do that when that's because why? It's because they, it wasn't a thing, and the association that was made at that time was less. And so likewise, you can see things like dogs sitting at doorways and stuff like that. If that was important to the people when it happened, when they were doing it, the dog's going to continue to do it. So laying that behavior at a young age is probably it's better if you can, but again, when we have the harder stuff of dealing with teenagers or dogs that are coming into rescue at an older age, it's a much more challenging deal there.
Because that is the most challenging age to start to train your dogs is about 8 months to 2 years. So yeah, that's that's a pretty big time span, you guys. So it's but it will pass. And well, and as you all know, that's when they turn them into the shelters because it's the most challenging. Alice says you have worked with a shutdown golden breed rescue from, but do you have any experience training them after you get? Yeah, Alice. Because my beagle is from a lab, and she was pretty. She wasn't shut down per se because she was a little younger, but she was really noise sensitive. And I think, and I'll be honest, some of the I belong to a group that got a lot of these beagles. And I think the biggest mistake that people make is they're trying to rush it and get the dogs to be okay soon. And unfortunately, with dogs that have been in puppy mills, laboratories, and things like that, the process is a long one. It's a long one. So just giving the puppy time and the space it needs to just decompress is really, really important. And I think people don't. They want the puppy to be okay. So sometimes leaving them alone, I know it's kind of hard, is really the better option. Just make sure they're fed, they're comfortable, they have a way to go to the potty and everything like that, and then just let them just decompress a little bit longer. And I know because my little beagle didn't want to come out of the crate almost for the first week. It was very, very challenging. Trying to get her to, and I just let her leave the door open when she was ready to come out, and so on and so forth until she was able to acclimate to my house. Now you would never know that granted, she went a lot faster though, and I'll tell you why. I also helped her with some medication, anti-anxiety medication, for a short time to help her acclimate, because they're so traumatized. And that made all the difference. It helped her not be so anxious, and it helped her learn. And now she's on nothing. She's just a regular dog, but she was able to work through some of that anxiety, with some help, right? Especially in those cases, Alice, where they've been in a lab and they've been in a puppy mill, they need a lot more help than just waiting, just trying to do the training, right? In some cases, sometimes they just need something to help them decompress. So.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, just be careful though, right? Because Alice, I know you love your dogs. And this isn't directed at you, but it's directed at rescue in general. Just be careful, just because they came from a terrible puppy mill, or they came from a lab, or they came from whatever, right? Ask the dog. Because I've seen dogs from wonderful breeders come out just a wreck. Yeah. And that's nothing. The breeder gave them the best start. I've also seen dogs come out of puppy mills, haven't seen the light of day, that are like, whatever, this is much better than where I was, right? So, and you'll just get varying degrees of that. So, again, I'm guessing what you get is much more of that shutdown,
right?
Goldens. But it's kind of like, just go slow, right? And sometimes understand what that dog needs. Sometimes there's dogs that they don't want to go out and walk, and they don't want to do things, right? They're happy to stay in the fenced-in yard, not really see the world, keep the world small. So always asking the dogs, what do you want your life to be, while trying to help them,
right,
see a bigger, better life, right? But sometimes they're like, I liked it small.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's hard for people, especially if you're a social person and you want to take your dog to ball games and things like that, right?
Right.
Sorry,
right.
Lisa, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that I lost my train of thought, but as far as no, that's okay. As far as the shutdown dogs, I would agree. I think, definitely have to give them time and determine what the deal is. I think a lot of times too, everyone's intention is to try to hurry up and make their lives better right away. And the problem is that doesn't work for everybody, right? It's a safety issue. And then am I safe and secure? And then can I trust this person? And, on up the line. So the basic needs need to be met. But if you look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to go up the ladder, right? Up that chain to determine where are you in terms of, are you okay to trust me now? And it's a process. And I think lots of times people also mistake the body language for the dog's tolerating versus they're okay. You know what I mean?
Right.
I've seen that, and it's sad because I'm like, they're really not okay. So, but
Yeah. Well, and like I said, my beagle took, I want to say a couple of weeks before she would even, venture out from her crate. And yeah, it seemed like it. And if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, 2 weeks is nothing.
mhm.
But it felt like an eternity. That, and then she would come out, and then you'd make a noise, and she'd go right back in. So, and that went on for several months. So, until she was good and ready is when she's, um, we let her make those decisions. And now she doesn't even seem like she's the same dog anymore. She's, noises don't bother her as much. I mean, some of it's going to always be a problem, but at home she's a pretty happy little dog. You would never know that she had the start she did. She's pretty resilient. And now, like I said, I did help her with a little bit of meds to help the anxiety piece and help her handle that. And then but it was for a very, very short time. Like, and then now it's been a couple of months. She hasn't been on anything, and she's doing really well. She's handling everything, but she just need a little bit of help to kind of get her over that hump. So, Joyce, yes, 8-month-old labs are just, and I am going. My lab is almost. I think the little guy is almost 6 months, and I'm like, oh my god, adolescence is just such a hard time, and it's like I'm trying to mentally prepare for it because it's challenging. So I'm trying to keep my attitude light, and if we have a bad training day, okay, we'll try it again the next day because that's just how it's going to be for a little while. Because now he's testing a little more, and he's like, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to, So it's a difficult, challenging time. But I think at the end of the day, you get through it, because now I have my two 5-year-olds are great, right? And they went through it, at the same time, which is a little more challenging for them. So,
Have you guys heard of there's this channel I used to watch, and to kind of help people understand the difference in terms of when you learn or what happens. It's called Smarter Every Day. It's on YouTube. I'm going to copy the link and put it into. You guys ever see that?
I think I have, yes.
He did the backwards bicycle. So it was a young child he was trying to get him to ride the bike. So when you turn to the right, the wheel went to the left, and when you turn to the left, the wheel went to the right.
Yeah.
And so it was very fascinating that, how quickly the child picked it up, but then he had to learn it, and it took him a pretty long time to learn that. And then he had to go back to riding the regular way where, the wheel and the handlebars turn the same way, and he had a hard time again. It was very interesting the way that worked, the neuroplasticity part of it, right? Because it changes. And I think that's what people don't understand. And I think the hard part about changing behavior or working with trying to make a better routine and pattern and stuff for you and your dog is that it's not the dog that is the issue, it's us, right? Because we don't change our behavior in order to affect how to change theirs, right? So like if you don't want them jumping at the door, or, whatever the case may be, we have to adjust ourselves and what we do to help get the dog to understand it's a different situation.
Right.
So it's very interesting, and things we don't take into account when we're working with dogs.
Right. And then the other thing I was going to say for those of you who, so we can agree that puppies or younger dogs learn a little quicker than the older dogs. The older dogs don't have as much cognitive flexibility. Again, it doesn't mean that they can't learn. It's just that it takes them a little longer to process it and put it into the long-term memory. Um, so for those of us, and it's really hard for those of us who do dog sports, you sometimes you see how they're able to work problems so well when they were, I don't know, a year or two ago, and then now all of a sudden they're having a little trouble with it. It's not unusual. It's part of the process. And then you just have to maybe give them more support or kind of remind them what they were, what the deal, what you want them to do, because it's they don't have that ability to solve as quickly and process it as quickly, right? Especially if you're trying to train them to do something new, it might take a little bit longer. Doesn't mean they can't learn it. It's just going to take a little bit longer in some cases. And again, and it varies from breed to breed, and it varies from dog to dog. The littler dogs live a little bit longer, so they might their cognitive flexibility might last longer versus a bigger dog that might take just a little bit longer. And this reminds me of a story that Suzanne told me about a bloodhound. They were trying. The handler was very frustrated with the dog, and I can't remember the story exactly. Very frustrated with the dog that he was just having some trouble in obedience. So what was happening is the handler was telling the dog to sit. Now you have to remember all those neurons and all that have to fire and go through the body to get that behavior, right? So if you have a very large dog and it's going to take them a while to tell them to sit, they're going to be like, okay, process, and then sit. And so by then the woman's like, okay, down. So it was a very frustrating because it just took the dog longer. Doesn't mean that he was dumb. It's just that they were just out of sync as far as the commands and her being able to wait for him to give them to her. So you have to remember that the size of the bigger the dog, sometimes it takes them, things might take a little longer for them to get from point A to point B in their brain, right? And to communicate it to all the rest. So.
It was interesting. So I have this little 3-month-old dog, and he knows sit, he knows down, and here's my Papillon, I can sit. And I'm like, that's awesome. Can you down? So I took a video, and it took like a while for him to go, oh, I have to put all my body down. And so I was like, you're supposed to be a Papillon. I thought you're smarter. But it just goes to show you, right? The maturity occurs based upon the individual, not necessarily the breed or the age or whatever. And so I thought that was funny. I'm like, okay, patience hat on. We'll be okay.
Right. Because it does take, in adolescence that they, that part of the brain is just still developing and growing. So they're going to make, some days are going to be really good training days and other days aren't. That's just what it is. So, most dogs, they're training, you can train them anytime, all the time. It's just I think it helps to set your expectations up, right? Like your dog is 10 years old. It might take them a little while to get where you want them to be, but they'll get there. Just may take a little bit longer. Just like trying to teach a 5-year-old another language and trying to teach a 70-year-old another language. You're going to get it, but I bet you the 5-year-old's going to pick it up a lot quicker than the somebody who's older. Not that they're both not, they're going to pick it up. It's just it's going to be different. The process to get to the end goal is going to take is going to be a little bit different. So I think being, having a more realistic goals, especially those of us that have adolescent dogs, that some days it's okay to say, you know what, we're not going to train today. We're just going to go home and we're just going to do nothing else. And we'll try it again tomorrow. And for me, I'm so busy and my schedule's so tight that sometimes I'm like, okay, we're going to work on this time. And unfortunately that my dog has other plans. So I have to decide, I have to be okay with going, all right, I'll just do it, later or another time.
How old Roscoe now?
Almost 2.
Okay.
He's born in March. So yeah, 23 months.
And what are you finding with him versus when you first got him? Granted, he's rescue and you've gone through different stuff, right? So
yeah. So I I know.
Love you.
Love you too. He goes, I'm 6. I'm good. I'm a good dog.
I'm this many.
I know. He's like, Fido hasn't made cameos, so I'm gonna make them.
No, Fido's in his new cat tree. So
He's like,
Oh my
somebody's
gosh.
got to make a cameo on Facebook Live.
I know.
Anyway, so one of the things that I have learned listening into Barking Brains, which is Dr. Kathy Murphy, I didn't know this. I mean, I did in the back of my head, but I didn't remember it. Fear memories, right? So this is why when you hear people say be super duper careful about your puppies, right? And your adolescence and fear periods and fearful things and bad experiences. So she was saying pretty much it is impossible to erase the fear memories. You can work on it and you can make some things better and some things you can't. So the other thing is that if they have a bad or scary, fearful experience, it solidifies during sleep.
Yeah.
So, right. So like if your dog got, mauled by another dog, or, even just a puppy, right? Some big friendly dog rushed up to say hi and your puppy's like, and runs behind you. Right. I would get them out of that situation and I would maybe find a super chill adult dog or something like that so they can have a good experience to counteract the bad one before you let them take a nap. I just found that super interesting and the sleeping, right? And so I don't know if you guys know this or not. I mean, I know you two do, but when you watch your puppies and your adolescent dogs sleep, right? All that little twitching and craziness, they look like they're having little seizures sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? All that stuff is muscles firing and neurons connecting, and there's so much going on during sleep. To know that those fearful memories are becoming imprinted during sleep is just crazy. So again, right? It's not just like, oh, we don't want our babies to have bad experiences and set them up for bad things. No, this is real. This is real stuff that sits into the brain. So anyway. So Roscoe, right? He's almost 2. He did not have great experiences. He was a fearful dog to begin with when they brought him up from Oklahoma. And he has a sister that was adopted out that I guess the rescue kind of asked them about it later. And sure thing, yep, she's a little bit afraid of people as well. A little bit afraid of the environment. So just fearful overall. I definitely got some testing at home when things are comfortable and he's feeling safe and secure. Like, do you really mean it? Which is one of the sucky things of adolescence we've been talking about, right? But still being in that molding, shaping adolescent time frame, I feel like he's made huge strides. So I too, kind of like Nancy said she did for her Beagle, I too put him on some medication. And I left him on those meds for 6 months and understanding throwing pills at a dog, even if it's behavioral medication, does not fix the problem, right? You have to do the behavior work. All the medication does is allow your dog to get into a frame of mind where they can learn and process. So things aren't quite as scary, but to give them skills, that's why you have to do that, right? So I worked really hard for those 6 months, doing a lot of stuff with people, and people are good and people have cookies and you don't have to meet people. People won't meet you, right? I'll protect you. We'll go say hi when you're ready, those types of things. And now it was last weekend, as a matter of fact, I was like such a proud person. So we were leaving, kind of packing up, and one of my students was like, oh, can I give him a cookie? And I was like, give us a minute. Let us go pee first. So I brought him back in and he walked right up to her chair, right? Go say hi, right? And he walked right up and he's like, do you have food? And she did. And he looked her right in the eye, made eye contact, which was huge, enormous. And then, of course, the person behind was like, oh, can I give him a cookie too? And I was like, sure. So she stood up, came over, stood right in front of him, right? Gave him a cookie. And asked him to sit, and gave him a cookie. And then she moved over 2 steps, and it was the best. He moved over 2 steps and sat. And she gives him another cookie. She moves, he moves. So, seeing that from just 9 months ago when I got him, and he would look at a strange person and hunker down and growl, and it's all fear. So giving him the skills to not be so fearful, just know there's another option. I don't know if we would have made as much progress if he so quickly, should I say, if he had been a little older. So that moldable mind in adolescence, it is a great time to train stuff like that, right?
Right. And it eventually will catch up. Does that make sense? Like eventually they will mature, and all the training you're putting in, it's not for naught. When you have an adolescent dog, you're going to put in the information, but eventually they'll mature, and all the training you've put in will pay off, right? So that's why we're not saying don't train your dog during adolescence, because that's kind of a mistake. You definitely want to make sure that you're doing all the training and working with your dog. Just know that some days you're going to be better than others, and you're just going to, kind of get past it. And eventually they're going to mature, and you'll be able. And Lynn, that's the absolute truth. Medication is a tool. It's not meant to be something for, some dogs have to be on it for life, but a lot of times it's just something that, and it has to be a case by case, right? Because you're not going to, all dogs don't, like Joanne said, dogs that come out of that situations that are like, well, it's fine. It was uncomfortable, but I'm okay. And other dogs need a lot more, right? And I knew my little beagle was going to move through quicker, because she seemed, just without the meds, she seemed to progress, just not fast enough. Not fast, not easy. Like she was still really, really scared. And I didn't want her to have more experience and time in that level of fear, because that would become neural pathways would be built then, and she'd get used to being really scared. So I didn't want her to have those things stick with her for long, right? And once she was able to handle things on her own, it was great. She was like, okay, I can do that. And that's to say, some of the other beagles, again, it's case by case. They're still struggling, they're still having a hard time, but that's a long time for a dog to be in that level of fear and be so worried. So that's why I was kind of like, well, why don't we really do need to help her along so that she can feel more comfortable, at least at home. That was my goal, so that she would be comfortable at home, and then eventually would work on the rest of the world later. But having her become more comfortable at home really was huge out in the world for her. So it was good.
And I think too, remember that with a medication situation, working with your vet or somebody who's qualified and understands the various pieces of meds is critical, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. It's not this drug covers this and so forth. You have to know, sometimes they have to mix them together, compound them where you're doing multiples. There's long game ones. There's ones that are more immediate. There's so many different ways. And not all vets understand, like it's not their forte. It's not what they're trained to do. That's a veterinary behaviorist. That's more intense and stuff like that. So if you're looking at drugs, you really need to consult somebody who is fully qualified to understand what the drugs are. So, and should it be, depending on the situation, it could be either a long-term or a temporary way to try to get them through specific situations. So, understanding what the actual issue is important. So,
Yeah. And if you have a biter, I'm just going to throw this out there for you guys, right? If you have a dog that's a biter and your vet's going to throw trazodone at you, you need to understand trazodone gets rid of inhibitions. So you may get a bitier dog, even though that's not what you're expecting, right? That's just part of what that medication does. So, and hopefully your vet is open and honest. I know, like when I took Roscoe, I said, can we try paroxetine instead of fluoxetine? In humans, paroxetine's used a little more for social phobias. And he looked right at me, he goes, I don't know, let's look it up. Right? He didn't know. And so he was absolutely open and honest and willing to say, I don't know. Right. And looking at it, he goes, well, same dosing. It's interchangeable. Shouldn't hurt the dog either way. He goes, so sure, we'll do that. But you know, I appreciate a vet who does that more than anything else in the world. Like, I don't know. Let's research it.
Right.
But yeah, Lisa's right. And you know, I don't tick off any vets saying this, but you know, my old vet, before she went into emergency medicine, you know, when we first started talking about behavioral meds, she looked right at me and she goes, Joanne, she goes, we get this much of it in vet school, this much. She goes, so when you ask me, she goes, I'm going to go in back and I'm going to open my pharmacology book. I'm going to do the first thing that it tells me to do, which is why these days you're seeing trazodone and you're seeing Prozac or fluoxetine, which are the same thing. Those are the two main drugs that vets will throw out at you if you're asking for that. Mm. So there's tons of other options on the table, but most vets aren't familiar with them. So they're going to prescribe what they're familiar with.
Yeah. And the other thing too is meds aren't the answer for everything. But one of the things Dr. Overall said, and this is, and this was you know, meds could be very controversial. I'm going to go there, but, and when we're talking about youth and training, they highly recommend that you start your dogs on meds younger than older, because what happens is they build the correct neural pathways at a younger age. Right. It's much more challenging when you wait until the dog's much older. And I never thought I'll be honest, I never thought of that before until I talked to her about it. And I thought, oh, that makes total sense, because then you're changing the brain early enough where they can put in all that good information and they can make it long term. So just makes so much more sense, because you don't have to put them on long, right? They're only on for a very short time and then you get rid of it, which is kind of another, like I said, another tool. And it doesn't have to be something that has to be on for life. But a lot of people, there's a stigma around meds. People don't want to use it. They think it's bad. They think it's a reflection. I don't know why people think it's such a problem. And then they wait so long. So then it's just that means that the dog's going to be on the medication that much longer, right? Because you could probably get them, if they're young, you get them on, get them off, and voila, life is good sooner. And again, it doesn't work that quickly for all. And my Beagle was already predisposed to she had a pretty decent temperament. So that's why hers went so quickly, because she already had the stuff to work with. She just needed a little help with the stress and the anxiety of her new life. And once she realized she was okay, and then her real personality came out, and she was fine. So then there's no reason to keep her on the meds, because she is able to adjust. Now she's able to adapt and adjust, because now she trusts us. She has a new life. She has the support of the other dogs. So it went really fast. But had she been a little older, and that's one of the things that helped. She was only a year old when I got her. So that really is very helpful. She was younger. So it went just that much quicker because she was a younger dog.
Yep. And if you are going to go the medication route, you're working with your veterinarian. Hopefully they tell you this is not a stop it whenever you want to drug. You really have to wean them off. But if you're going to start, meds, you really should work with a qualified dog trainer. Yep. Because again, like we've been saying, right, meds will help them get to the ability, that learning stage, and it'll help them, but you actually need to do the work so they can solidify what the right choices are. So just reach out if you have one of those cases.
Right. And so the question of the hour is, what age is most effective? Yes, it's absolutely better when they're younger. For sure. They learn quicker. They put things into long-term memory. So they're able to generalize a lot easier when you expose them to the different environments at a much younger age. However, that doesn't mean if your dog's a little bit older, you can't achieve great results too. It just understanding that you might take a bit longer, and it might be a more challenging road, if you will, to get there, but you can still get there. And it's no different for people. When we're young, we learn much quicker. As we get older, it slows down, but we can still learn We still learn. We're still able to, um, we're still able to learn it. Just you might have to repeat it a couple more times as we get older, or we might have to read that article twice instead of just keeping in there once. Dogs are the same, and dogs rate of aging is a lot faster than ours. But for those of you who are doing dog sports with your dogs as they get older, just know that they're not, they might be slowing down a little bit. Just notice that and just be aware that that's happening so that you can support them. Doesn't mean they're going to stop doing their sport or they're not going to be able to do it. They're just going to have to do it differently. You might have to change how you work with them so that you can give them the support they need. And because a lot of people think, oh, he's old and so he should just stay home. No, dogs really enjoy, if they enjoy it, they get to come out, they get to work, use their brain. It's so good for them. And you notice, and here's I'm going to say it with the dog folks or people who are dog people. They tend to stay a lot younger and more vibrant because they're busy with their dogs. They have stuff to do. They're learning with their dogs. They're bonding with their dogs. And so it really helps the people too stay pretty active. And so it's the same for dogs and people, right? The more active the busier you keep your brain, the more you use it, the better it's going to be. You're just going to stay very more cognitively flexible, which is all we want for our dogs. Again, some dogs, depending on health issues, may not be able to enjoy that. But those of you who do get your dogs to do different dog sports, like the barn hunt or whatever, nose work, agility, obviously is more it's a mental thing, but it's also a physical thing. So that one is a little different. If your dog is physically not able, you might need a little bit of a retire them earlier. But what we're seeing a lot, and especially at my facility, a lot of people whose dogs are now retired from agility, they come in and do scent work. So the dog still keeps busy and they're just not beating up their bodies as much, right? Would you say that's true, Joanne, Lisa?
Yep, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Because I find that
it's about staying active, right? Even when we get old, it's important to have that cognitive connections and, the social situation. And I think it's really more important than we really realize. I mean, that's why with the senior centers, they have different things. I saw something was very fascinating because I'm always interested in learning, but there was, I guess, a place in Sweden, I want to say, or something to that effect, where they do different hand-eye coordination types of games with stuff that they do. So they have like a line of books and they play ping pong hockey with, they're like boxes or something, and then they push them and then try to get past the other person. So it's like a staff member against, a senior, and then just some different coordinations where they put different colors on each of their limbs, and then they have to walk and then touch that with that. It's really interesting the way that they did that, but to get them up and moving and engaging socially is important. Otherwise, without that, lack of movement is bad. It's really, really unhealthy, and that will kill you.
And you definitely need to be able to. So while it's important to train your puppy to give them the manners they need as they get more mature, it also is very important to keep your mature dog mentally active and busy as well. Mm-hmm. So there's ideally the younger, the more better they learn. However, dogs still learn all the time. Mm-hmm. And they're also learning when you're not even teaching them. So it's really important that you when you get some weird behavior, you're going to think about, well, where did you get that from? Well, they might have learned it from you. You just didn't need to teach them that. They just figured it out, which is great when that happens. So hopefully, you want to be thinking about what you want them to learn and what you want them to come away with, and that's why in puppies you want to work on that relationship with you and building that bond, because again, those things that you build early on are going to stick a little bit better. They're going to be part of who they are. So it's really important to do that, right? And so, and kind of manage it properly. Like my puppy is lovely, but he's actually a little too sticky. So we're trying to teach him to be away from me sometimes. So that
Who
again,
needs that?
yeah.
Right? Who needs
Oh
that?
my gosh. I know. It's like, dude, he's extremely wants to be with mommy all the time. So yeah, it's one of those. Anyway, anything else you guys want to add?
No, I
No.
think we about covered it.
All right. Thank you all for joining. Those of you who did in us on Super Bowl Sunday. I know because there's a lot of people probably watching the game. So thank you for tuning in. And hopefully, as you watch the replay, if you have questions, feel free to email us with any questions you may have. And have a good evening. Good night, all.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.